What if I told you that this little app right here basically wouldn't exist as we know it without women? No, seriously, we keep hearing the stories of the men who built things, from the computer to the phone to social media, but almost never about the women who pushed them out into the mainstream. I'm thinking about the women behind Apollo 11, the women who helped build the world's first computer, the moms who built the influencer industry. Breaking news, women are into tech, and they have been for 150 years. But the fact that women buy, use, and are actually good with tech seems to be something society is hell-bent on keeping secret. The tech industry treats women as an afterthought at best, even though technology only breaks through once we show up and make it usable. So, how did we get here? Women have historically been the most active users of social media. None of these platforms would be what they are today without women, because we're quite literally why they work. Facebook didn't take off until women adopted it. In 2014, women made up 60% of its users, and Spotify was heavily driven by playlist culture, which is, in itself, largely driven by women. In fact, the first big wave of influencers were nearly all women. I mean, think about all those mommy bloggers from back in the day. The early YouTubers, the beauty bloggers, women were the most active users of these platforms because it was a very social thing to do. As a whole, women use social media as it was fundamentally intended, in a social way.
But I got some insight the other day into the new frontier of mommy blogging. They say there might be something like 10,000 of them out there. Have caught on that what Colleen says, mom to mom, is marketing gold. Just look at her home office.
So back then, women spent more time on these platforms than men. They adopted them much faster, and they built the communities that made them valuable and eventually very, very profitable. Women and other marginalized groups seized on social networks because they gave them a way to bypass traditional gatekeepers. Do you think the media was talking about women's interests back then? No! So these women built that up for themselves through these platforms. And yet, when the pandemic hit and everyone was tapped into influencer culture, a lot of tech leaders started talking about it like it was some brand new, hyper-innovative idea. Journalist and author Taylor Lorenz said it best in an interview for her book, Extremely Online. Quote, "The creator economy was founded by women. It is a female-dominated industry, which is why I think Silicon Valley has not taken it seriously. Which is why when content creation became lucrative, we started seeing a push to kick women out. In 2023, roughly 75% of influencers were women, but you wouldn't guess it by looking at the loudest voices on our feeds, or the highest paid ones. Women creators are still paid less than their male counterparts, and if you're a woman of color, I won't even get into it. Women laid the groundwork for an entire industry, and their stories are being actively hidden. But let's take it back even further, because this whole thing doesn't start with apps. Long before Instagram stories and TikTok dances took social media by storm, there was a new, slightly terrifying technology people weren't sure they needed: electricity. In the 1880s, light bulbs were a brand new thing, and honestly, no one was rushing to buy them. People already had gas lights, oil lamps, candles, so why change something that worked just fine? Well, women actually saw what electric technology could do for them and jumped straight on it. Electric sewing machines meant no more stitching by hand. Refrigerators meant no more ice boxes. They were the early adopters who brought electricity from novelty to necessity, and they did it again with the telephone. See, the phone was once considered a woman's toy because, talking was a woman's thing, and what was the phone's primary use? Communication. So of course, women were perceived as being naturals with this technology. In fact, in many romantic stories of that time, men struggled with phones while women used them with ease.
Telephone TV, with callers able to see as well as hear.
Women became such good enunciators that any man who'd enunciate his words and speak clearly over the phone risked being seen as, gasp, having feminine traits. Some establishments even began offering voice instructions specifically to female students, because clarity of speech over the phone had become such a feminized skill. Thus, women became the custodians of phones in the home. They were the ones booking doctor appointments, house, managing school stuff, neighbors, family events, and the remnants of that can still be seen today. Women are 2 to 3 times more likely to go online to research things related to family health. And the same pattern played out again with the typewriter.
Expert typists seldom look at the keyboard, and most of them sit up frightfully straight.
When the Scholes and Glidden typewriter came to the American market in 1874, it was marketed as being so easy that even a woman could use it. And use it she did. Women adopted it so rapidly that they went from being 18 to 80% of the nation's secretaries. But women weren't just shaping tech, they were also building it. Women like Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson made space exploration possible. Hedy Lamarr's co-invention of frequency hopping laid the groundwork for Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and GPS. Radia Perlman, often called the mother of the internet, created the algorithm that powers the modern web. Women were even programmers before programming was considered a glamorous job. In fact, it was seen as such a natural profession for women that Cosmopolitan magazine once ran an article called "The Computer Girls," advertising the tech field to women and suggesting it offered better career opportunities than almost anything else available to them at the time. Dr. Grace Hopper, one of the most celebrated early engineers in history, even told a reporter that programming was just like planning a dinner and that, quote, "women are naturals at computer programming." And, well, she wasn't wrong. When America built its first electronic computer during World War II, nearly 200 women, both civilian and military, worked on the project as human computers, performing ballistics computations. And 6 of them were selected to actually program the machine. And yet, most of us still don't know their names. See, we've long minimized the work of women, those who've laid the groundwork for male success. You know the saying, behind every great man is an even greater woman? Well, in tech, that seems to happen over and over again. Women at the time, and now, rarely receive credit for innovation or invention. I mean, remember those 200 women I mentioned from World War II? Well, while the press celebrated their achievements, it also completely undercut them. Wartime writing would say things like, and I'm just paraphrasing here, "Oh, what these women are doing is incredibly difficult for what it is," or "Look at these women strongly stepping up to their jobs, our strong men left behind, and making them femininely delicate with their soft little delicate fingers and lady wiles." Yeah, it could never just be that women were incredibly good at their jobs, or just naturally gifted. Think about it. You've never really heard of a woman being described as a misunderstood genius with an eccentric vision who built something amazing. No, that's almost exclusively reserved for men. And yet, the world's first computer programmer ever, Ada Lovelace, was a woman. So yes, contrary to popular belief, women use technology early, and women bring it into the mainstream. So why do we think the opposite? Well, the answer is quite straightforward. When tech got lucrative, women got pushed out, and sexism played a big role in that. And I'm not just talking about microaggressions. I'm talking about how entry-level computer science classes used nude images of Playboy models to teach engineers how to turn physical photographs into JPEGs. That kind of sexism. But I'm getting ahead of myself. As I mentioned before, programming, in its early days, was considered routine. It was seen as low status, fit for a woman. In fact, companies really wanted to recruit women for these tech roles because they were seen as cheap and obedient.
In the foreground, Betty Jennings is programming the master programmer, which combined the subroutines set up on the local units into a single master routine.
But then, in the mid-1960s, the industry started growing, and it grew fast. In the 50s, there were only 2 electronic computers in the whole United States. By the 60s, it was a $20 billion industry.
The big difference when he grows up, in fact, if we wanted to wait for the year 2001, is that he will have in his own house, not a computer as big as this, but at least a console through which he can talk to his friendly local computer and get all the information he needs.
Thus, demand for programmers skyrocketed, salaries went up, and along with it, so did the prestige. So naturally, men wanted in. But they didn't want to come in as coding clerks. No, that's what women did. So they rebranded the whole thing. It was a dark art, one for the brightest of minds. As Nathan Ensmenger, historian of computing and author of The Computer Boys Takeover, wrote, "To be a devotee of a dark art, a high priest, or a sorcerer was to be privileged, elite, master of one's own domain." See, programming programming was no longer something clerical. No, it required specialized knowledge and a very specific type of genius. One who was antisocial, mathematically inclined, and most important of all, male. Software firms even created personality tests designed to find the ideal programmer.
Our lives are shaped as profoundly by personality as they are by gender and race.
It is the most well-known personality type quiz in the world.
One company, System Development Corporation, contracted psychologists who interviewed 1,400 engineers, 1,200 of them men, and developed an entire ideal programmer profile from that sample. But because their test group was almost entirely male, their results disproportionately identified men as the ideal candidates. And so that's who was hired. It was a sort of self-fulfilling cycle. Because the hiring process favored men became overrepresented in tech companies, which in turn fed popular perceptions of engineering as a masculine domain.
Control over a bewildering environment has been facilitated by new techniques of handling vast amounts of data at incredible speeds. The tool which has made this possible is the high-speed digital computer.
Not to mention that because the tests were designed to filter out extroverts and empathetic candidates, the conclusion ended up being that the best programmers didn't like people. That's how we got the stereotype of the antisocial male nerd genius, and a field dominated by men, and sexism. Which brings me back to the images of the Playboy models. That wasn't a one-off. Using nude pics to train engineers became standard practice for computer science departments worldwide. One of them, Lena Soderbergh, even became known as the first lady of the internet due to the fact that her Playboy image was used in image processing research for decades. Mind you, a position she held up until 2015. I mean, first lady of the internet does sound pretty wholesome once you remove the context. But anyways, by the 1980s, pop culture also started reinforcing the idea that computers were for boys. Movies like War Games, Weird Science, and Revenge of the Nerds really sold us on the idea of geek boy geniuses. And when computers started popping up in homes, they were marketed almost entirely to boys.
So whatever Brian wants to be, an Apple personal computer can help him be it.
We were continuously fed the idea that tech was by the boys, for the boys. And it worked. Families started buying computers for their boys, even if their daughters were just as interested. And the share of women studying computer science, which had been rising for decades, started falling. A 1985 study even found that 73% of men used a computer weekly, compared to just 45% of women. Thus, by the end of the 80s, the image of the ideal tech worker had fully taken hold, and he was a programming guru, a computer cowboy, a whiz kid. It was all about, as Ensmenger put it, quote, elevating the performance of masculinity to an extreme. And ironically, despite the image of social isolation, early computer centers were actually deeply social spaces. Yeah, Ensmenger describes male camaraderie of the time being defined by video game marathons, all-night code tests, pranks, inside jokes. They were out here having a time. It was truly a boys' club, and it was designed to feel one. And that's still in effect today. Tech still feels like a boys' club, and it's pretty adamant on who it doesn't want to let in. In the US, for example, software engineering remains overwhelmingly male. I'm talking 80% male, and we still associate STEM with masculine qualities. And remember that whole whiz kid, misunderstood genius archetype I talked about before? We're still applying it to tech bros. Think of the most famous one today and how he's marketed to us. It even feels like there's a correlation between that and the now omnipresent grind culture we keep seeing male influencers push on social media. Which actually brings me to my next point of contention. For the longest of times, mommy bloggers and beauty vloggers were dismissed as ditzy, frivolous girls with no real jobs. But interestingly, once influencer culture was legitimized, we saw an influx of all of these male voices. Literally. Our internet today seems to be populated by a bunch of masculine voices, podcast bros, and the manosphere. even though the thing they're all a part of, the creator economy, was built by women. Forget white flight. We've got male migration, folks. This is actually a part of what historian Jennifer Light calls the masculinization of tech. Once the money comes, the narrative changes, and the women who've laid the groundwork and built the foundations become footnotes to the men's story. And those men, in turn, completely monopolize the space. And it does make me wonder, influencing, will this too get overrun by men? Et tu, influence? No, but more seriously, there is a very measurable cost to building tech without women in the room. When Apple launched its health app, designed to track every conceivable function of the human body, it launched without a menstrual or reproductive cycle tracker. Yep. Although Apple quickly rectified the situation, it had effectively forgotten about half of the population. Early voice recognition software didn't reliably recognize female voices because none of the developers were women, and, well, nobody thought to test it on women. And for decades, airbags and seatbelts weren't calibrated for women's anatomy because crash test dummies were designed based on the average male body. Female-sized crash test dummies were only federally required in the US in 2011.
Fight for gender equality. For decades, government crash tests have relied on male dummies to represent women, even though men and women have different physical builds.
2011. So up until recently, women were 73% more likely to get seriously injured in a car accident. As researcher Caroline Criado-Perez documents in Invisible Women, our entire designed world has been built around a male default so entrenched, it's become effectively invisible. And most of it wasn't even done out of malicious intent. It was done because women just weren't in the room. And for the women that are, they often have to deal with a completely different set of problems, like cleaning up after meetings and unloading office dishwashers? I mean, come on, guys, what are we doing here? Step up. 2. The streets. Anyways, women still make up only 25% of the tech workforce, even though studies consistently show that diverse teams make better decisions and better products for everyone. Looking at you, anything to do with women's health? And research shows that companies whose executive teams are at least 30% women are more likely to outperform financially. So the cost here isn't just moral, it's financial. And what's quite ironic is that behind all of the tech world's talk of disruption and challenging the status quo, the tech industry has actually tended to reinforce that status quo, particularly when it comes to gender roles and women. There was actually a group back in the 90s who was about that life. They were called VNS Matrix, and they called themselves cyber feminists. They even built a video game in which all players were genderless and invited to battle the sexist Big Daddy mainframe. And if that's not disruption, then I don't know what is. See, the question here shouldn't be, are women into tech? It should be, is tech finally ready for women? If you build products on the assumption that the normal user is a man, you don't just exclude women, you build worse technology, and you miss out on the creativity and insight that actually makes tech worth using in the first place. Now, there are some people who are fighting to change that. Dr. Joy Buolamwini founded the Algorithmic Justice League, specifically to expose biases baked into AI systems, which includes facial recognition software that in 2019 still had trouble identifying female and darker-skinned faces. We've also got Girls Who Code, who's doing the work of getting more young women into engineering pipelines. All of them aren't begging for a seat at the table, they're building their own. They're trying to redesign both the systems and the stories. And we need more of that. I mean, if history is anything to go by, once women join and women lead, the whole system does get better for everyone. Well, that's it from me on this one. If you liked what you saw and enjoyed what you learned, go ahead and share this video, subscribe, and let me know in the comments what you want me to dig into next. I'll be down the rabbit hole either way.